It was a tale of two halves for the Louisville football team in the 21-14 victory over the Indiana Hoosiers on Saturday afternoon. We're going to talk about how it wasn't pretty, but a win is a win. With that being said, let's get right on into this episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. As always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Well, it was a very, very up and down game for the Louisville Cardinals over the weekend. However, they did end up victorious, 21-14 over Indiana. Both halves were very different. Louisville was extremely good in the first half. The first half showed how good this team can be in terms of potential, but the second half was rough, and it represents the concerns moving forward. And then to conclude the show, we'll talk about how this team's perseverance and ability to finish games is going to prove to be beneficial down the road. So, for starters, Louisville opening up the season 3-0 for the first time since 2016 in Lamar Jackson's Heisman season. The Cardinals would go on to go 4-0 at the beginning of 2016, but for the first time since 2016, Louisville is 3-0. They achieved that by defeating Indiana 21-14, and it was a very, very interesting game because Louisville led this contest 21-0 at halftime. They got the ball back, or they were scheduled to get the ball back after the half, and it looked like all signs were pointing to the Cardinals running away with this game. And Indiana decided to go with an onside kick in the second half. They recovered it, and Louisville seemingly never found their footing. But we'll talk about the second half here momentarily. The first half, Louisville absolutely dominated. And the first half represents the potential of what this team can be. It showed you glimpses of just how good this team can be. Offensively, when this offense is in the right spot, when the offense is at full throttle, it's going to be very, very tough for defenses to keep them in check. Overall, in that first half, you look at the drives. The Cardinals missed the field goal on the first drive. I mean, it was kind of rough. Louisville was able to move the ball down the field, 10 plays, 71 yards, but a missed field goal led to Louisville leaving points on the board. 3 of the next 4 drives. Now, granted, I will say that the fourth drive was literally one play. It was a kneel down by Jack Plummer. The other 3 drives of the first half for the Cardinals were all touchdowns. Plummer had some issues early on in the game connecting with Jamari Thrash. He connected with him on the first drive, but Thrash had already beaten his man, had to slow step it a little bit, and by the time the ball got there, the defender was there. But the next drive, 2nd and 10 from the 15, Plummer hit Thrash on a deep route, 85-yard touchdown for Louisville to break the scoreless tie. And then they were able to move the ball down the field, ran the ball extremely well. Maurice Turner found the end zone on the second drive. And then the third drive was a 7-play drive in which Jawar Jordan had a 25-yard house call. Ultimately, Louisville was clicking on all cylinders, both offensively and defensively, because they probably should have scored on all of their offensive drives, at least a field goal. If Brock Travelstead hits that field goal, it's 24-0. So ultimately, it is what it is. But Louisville goes up 21-0 at half. We talk about how good the offense is. It just kind of goes to show you that this is an extremely balanced offense. I mean, the passing game is still improving and getting there, but there's a ton of weapons at the receiving core. The offensive line has been great. And shout out to the rushing game. Louisville's rushing attack is 4th in the country. in rushing offense with, the three running back rotation. They're averaging 251 yards per carry. And they're trailing just Air Force, Central Florida, and UCLA. And then you look at what Jawar Jordan has been able to do with just 32 touches through the first 3 games. He leads the country in yards per attempt. He literally, statistically speaking, gets a first down on every single rush. He averages 10.75 yards per carry. He is almost 2 yards. He's averaging almost 2 yards more than number 2 on the list, who is 8.78. And then rushing yards in the season, obviously, Jordan, top 10 there as well. He's number 9 with 344, and he has the least amount of carries by at least 8 less carries than the 7 ahead of him on the list. So he's absolutely playing fantastic. Isaac Guerrero has been great as well. And then Maurice Turner, who came back from injury, also very, very solid. So the offense this first half highlighted just how lethal this offense can be, to where they're moving the ball down with defenses not able to have any answers, because there was not one drive in the first half in which Louisville was not able to move the ball down the field. They had a mixture of big plays, but also they were essentially creating their own tempo. Establishing the run. Offensive line was creating separation, creating gaps, but also helping in pass pro as well. And then you look at what defensively, what Louisville was able to do. In some situations, they bent but didn't break. They forced a punt on the first drive. It was a 32-yard drive, forced a punt, 42-yard drive on the next possession. But 3rd and 12 at the Louisville 37, Taven Jackson's pass was deflected and intercepted by Cam Kelly. They went 24 yards on the next drive and punted, -3 yards on the next one and punted, and then 17 on the next one and punted. So every single drive in the first half showed that, this Louisville defense, when they're playing really, really well, I think it just raises the overall ceiling of this team, because you see just how good this team can be, especially if they put it all together. I mean, Louisville was a 10-point favorite coming into this game, and I don't necessarily think that Indiana is one of the best teams in the Big Ten, but I also don't think that they're a team that is a bottom feeder that's only going to win like 2 games. Now, granted, their schedule is kind of tough, so who knows, but I think people didn't necessarily give enough credit or talk about Indiana enough the way that they should have. Now, granted, I'm not going to sit here and act like Indiana is Ohio State or Michigan or any other solid Big Ten team, but I mean, they're a respectable opponent, and to be beating that opponent 21-0 at halftime, while at the time showing no signs of slowing down, well, there you go. And it kind of goes to show you that when this team is firing on all cylinders, it's going to be tough for teams to take them down. Offensively, I think that Jack Plummer, when he's going through his reads and he's confident in those reads and he's not second-guessing the reads or he's hesitating, but he's firing the ball at the break of the route to where Jamari Thrash creates that separation. Look, Jamari Thrash, statistically speaking, is, in my opinion, actually, statistically speaking, eye test, whatever it may be, he is a top 3 receiver in the ACC, probably top 2, along with Keon Coleman from Florida State. Nobody in the first 3 games has been able to guard him. There's been some drops. Kevin Coleman Jr. had a drop around the goal line. Now, granted, it was double coverage. It still hit him in the chest. So that's something that you'll look forward to. Now, granted, that was in the second half. That was a drive that really hurt the Louisville offense and defense as a result. But look, I think that there's things that we could talk about in terms of improvement, but we also need to give this team credit. This offense has been very, very solid. You just look at what they've been able to do through the first couple of games. Now, granted, you have to go out and acknowledge that Murray State wasn't the best opportunity, or they weren't the best opposition, but Louisville has the most efficient offense of any team in the country with a first-year head coach, and that is definitely a blessing. Not even a blessing in disguise. That's just a full-on blessing, because Brohm's offense has been as good as advertised. We're going to talk about how not only the offense, but the team in general, defensively as well, needs to improve, because the second half, as good as the first half was, the second half deflated all of the air in that momentum balloon. And we'll talk about that here momentarily. We'll do that here after we talk about our friends over at BetterHelp. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, life gets tough. Can keep you up at night with racing thoughts. It wakes you up early, preventing you from being able to enjoy your life. Whatever may have you. Look, life gets tough, and sometimes you need some external help. When you hear the word therapy, sometimes it's a bad connotation, but most of the time I feel like it's something that definitely can benefit your life, whether you have gone through therapy yourself or you know someone that has benefited from it. You can attest to it. I have been through therapy before to help my mental being, and it has absolutely paid dividends. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnCollege today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnCollege. Hey, Cardinal fans, college football season obviously is here. We're about 25% of the way through, and this season Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live each Friday. Locked On will go live from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, while also going in depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts, covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it. Okay, heading on into the second segment of this post-game recap episode of the show. Louisville now 3-0 after defeating Indiana on Saturday at Lucas Oil Stadium. It was a great first half. 21-0. You're going to get the ball back after halftime, try to increase the lead, and put Indiana out of the game early on in the second half. Unfortunately, the exact opposite happened for Jeff Brohm's team. As much as Brohm he said after the fact that we talked about Indiana possibly going with the onside kick. Regardless if he talked about it or not, Indiana did recover that onside kick, and they went down the field and scored a touchdown in 3 plays. Jalen Lucas was a player that we talked about Louisville needing to find out where he was at all times. They really, really weren't able to do so. He only carried the ball 8 times for 29 yards, but he had 10 catches for 98 yards and a touchdown. That touchdown came on the first drive of the second half to where he had, I think it was a 30-yard touchdown over the middle of the field on a blown coverage from the linebacking core. Louisville ended up punting the ball, and Indiana then turned around and tried to create that momentum. It was a bad punt from Brock Travelstead. I'll just say it how it is. You saw that it was, I think, only – I got to see how many yards it actually was on the punt there for Louisville. I'm not sure why it's got absolutely – okay, it was an 18-yard punt. My apologies there. But this was a drive to where Louisville had every opportunity to create some momentum of their own in that second half. Jack Plummer threw a pass deep to Jamari Thrash that was actually a touchdown, but it ended up getting called back due to holding, and the drive stalled out after that, and they punted the ball away. Thankfully, Louisville was able to get Indiana to turn it over on downs, but right after that, you're up 21-7 midway through the third quarter at your own 49 on 3rd and 4. Plummer throws it deep to the Louisville receiving core. I forgot who he threw it to at this point. Actually, it was Kevin Coleman Jr. on the pass that hit him in the chest. He should have caught it, but it was in double coverage. If you looked, Plummer could have ran it for 4 yards for the first down, which he did in that game against Indiana, but he decided to go deep. It is what it is. Trying not to overly criticize that performance, but it felt like that was a momentum-shifting play. Indiana would then go 97 yards down the field in 13 plays to score from 2 yards out from Josh Henderson. Louisville punted the ball again, followed up by another punt. And then the very end of the game, 4th and goal from about the half-yard line, Josh Henderson gets the carry, and TJ Quinn and the rest of the Louisville defense stand him up to get the turnover on downs. Louisville ended up securing the game, and a win is a win. It wasn't pretty, but you got the victory, and that's the main thing to focus on. But the second half represents the concerns for this team moving forward. Am I overly concerned about this team in terms of consistency? It's early, not really. But I do also acknowledge that this team has to get better in certain aspects. Offensively, I think that Plummer has to get better with his cohesiveness with the wide receiving core. There are many times where the wide receivers were open, many times where he made some decisions that I didn't agree with. Now, granted, I'm just a podcast host, so you can take everything with a grain of salt because obviously I'm being overly critical here. I think Plummer did a lot of great things on Saturday afternoon. But if you probably asked, tell you he didn't have the greatest game. Statistically speaking, looking at his stats numbers, he was 13 of 23, 238 yards, 1 touchdown to 1 interception. He carried the ball 8 times for 42 yards. So overall, I think he did some solid things, but he also made some mistakes that were pretty costly. The interception, now granted, it hit Kevin Coleman in the hand, so Coleman deserves some of the blame as well. But I think if you just scramble there and get the first down, I think he didn't handle the pressure well. I think he got a little bit rattled to where once that pressure came, it's like he was already on the move, didn't necessarily stand in the pocket. Now granted, he does throw well on the move, but overall, I think that there were opportunities like that first drive. If he hits Jamari Thrash in stride instead of severely underthrowing it, then Jamari Thrash gives Louisville a 7-0 lead. But like I said, no quarterback's going to be perfect. We're just talking about, I think the rushing attack is great. I think that the receivers are creating separation. I think that the offensive line's creating that time to throw, and the overall holes for the rushing. I think that Plummer is going to get better. I think that Louisville just needs for him to continue to improve throughout the throughout the next couple of weeks. Defensively speaking, I know a lot of players slipped on that turf. I think that the Cardinals need to do better of getting pressure on the opposing quarterback. I think that that's the main thing here for me. The Cardinals did not record a single sack on Taven Jackson. They did, however, record 6 tackles for loss, which is solid, but there were many times to where the pass rush got into the backfield, but they never truly got home and converted the pressure into a sack. You're going to hear from Grant Mulligan, State of Louisville football analyst, on the next episode of the show about why that is sort of hindering the Louisville defense. I thought that the secondary had some solid moments in this one, but there was also times to where I think that Taven Jackson just had a lot of time to throw in the pocket, and it allowed the Indiana receivers to get themselves open. Credit to Indiana for getting those guys open as well. You look at the rushing numbers here, not great for the team rushing the ball. I mean, they ran the ball 27 times for 58 yards and a touchdown. Now, granted, some of that is a tackle for loss yardage as well. But overall, I think that, the rushing defense was fine. I think that you just have to fine tune the passing defense. Look, this is a new scheme offensively, new scheme defensively, new personnel playing with each other. So you can talk about how the consistency or lack thereof scares you a little bit. And I understand it's a concern here and there, but we're going to talk on the next episode of why it's not too big of a concern. I think that Jack Plummer is going to continue to improve. Louisville needs him to continue to improve. Defensively speaking, I think that this team is going to continue to get better and better, especially getting Josh Minkins back soon in the back half of the secondary. But shout out to Cam Kelly, by the way. He had a fantastic game. But areas for improvement, I think the second half represents the notion that this team is far from a finished product. And if your team is a finished product in week 3 of a season, then something is wrong. So, but as rough as the second half was, the silver lining was that this team is not like teams in the past. They finish games and they persevere. We're going to talk about that here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at Athletic Brewing Company. The game changer for Louisville this week, in my opinion, was Jamari Thrash. However, Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. They're fit for all times. You can drink them at any time, anywhere, and make any activity more enjoyable. Watching a big game, tackling work, working out, whatever may have you. There's no hangovers. There's over 50 styles of craft non-alcoholic beer, including IPAs, Goldens, sours, and more. My favorite, especially with this time of the year, is the Oktoberfest. Absolutely fantastic flavor there. You can get them online in stores. Absolutely incredible. Find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use the promo code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's the code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Athletic Brewing Company and athleticbrewingcompany.com, and exclusions and conditions apply. Okay, heading on into the final segment of this post-game recap of the show. Second half wasn't great. It looked like Louisville was on their way to a big victory. Unfortunately, that's not what happened, but they did end up winning the game 3-0 for the first time since 2016. I'm not one to throw any shade. I am grateful for what Scott Satterfield and company did for this program when they were here. They left it better than they found it. But throughout the years in which Satterfield was here, the team had issues closing out and winning the 50-50 games. They won those styles of games in 2019. The remainder of the tenure, not so much. I'm not so sure that Louisville is 3-0 if this was a previous year. Because when the going got tough and it was pretty easy to slip into a loss, I think Louisville did a great job of withstanding the adversity and ultimately winning the game. Week 1, you go down by double digits, you come back, you go up by 1, Georgia Tech's driving, you force the fumble, and then you score, and you keep scoring to push the lead out, and then you win the game. You beat Murray State, it is what it is. Week 3, it's 21-14. Louisville's offense really can't get anything going in the second half, and the defense has just given up a 13-play, 87-yard drive. Louisville punts the ball. In the fourth quarter, the defense then clutches up and gets a 3-and-out on the Indiana offense. Louisville punts again. You give the ball back to Indiana on their 10-yard line with 8 minutes and 27 seconds left, and they immediately start walking down the field. And there's a couple penalties in that drive, and Indiana gets the ball first and goal from the 5-yard line. There's a false start call. They get it to second and goal from the 7, third and goal from the 8. Taven Jackson just misses the end zone. It's fourth and goal from the 1-yard line. If Indiana scores, they tie it up with just under 5 minutes to go. Maybe some of this is on the play call, but stopping a team on the goal line is very, very tough. Getting a goal line stand is very tough. Shout out to TJ Quinn on getting the tackle, but more importantly, shout out to the defense as a whole. They bent, but they did not break. Sort of the same way in week 1. Granted, two things can be true at one time. You can admit that there are obvious areas of improvement that are needed. That's absolutely 100% true. You can also admit that this team has done a very good job at finishing games. That is a trait that is extremely crucial to have, that perseverance. Because if we talk about this expectation, these lofty expectations that was put on this team before the season, if you want them to get to 8, 9, 10 wins, then you have to have that perseverance. You have to win the games that are going down to the wire, because there's very, very little margin for error throughout the season between wins and losses. So for this team to show that perseverance early on as they work through some of the growing pains when it comes to schematic changes, new personnel, whatever. It is what it is. The team needs to be better, but they've looked solid at a good amount of time. Now we're seeing this team be clutch and win games at the end and not falter when the pressure is on. That is something that if you find any positive in that game against Indiana in the second half, it was that the team clutched up once again. That's something that can't be said for teams over the past couple of years. So that's going to wrap up today's episode of the show. To find the Locked On Louisville podcast on all this graphic, that was the intro. So don't pay attention to that. Stay tuned to this graphic. My apologies. The show is free and available wherever you get your podcasts.